The back-to-back Stanley Cup champions are disrespected based on who has been selected as their opening night opponent.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Monday, July 14th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at _FLA Panthers, and anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Shout out to everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. You can do that all on FanDuel. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. We are going to discuss the Panthers' opponent chosen for opening night this upcoming season, which will be taking place on October 7th. We're also going to discuss the Stanley Cup making their rounds through the days with the Cup, starting with AJ Greer. We're going to discuss his day with the Cup. And also, we're going to discuss how the new CBA that's starting not this coming season, but the next season will have to have cap compliant playoff 20-man rosters, and how would the Panthers have fit in if the rule were in place today? So that is today's rundown on the show. So the NHL announced that there is going to be a triple header on Tuesday, October 7th, as the NHL will be making its return after summer break, draft, free agency, you name it. Florida Panthers are back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, and usually it's tradition for the champions to kick off the regular season with the opening game, and the Panthers for a second straight year are starting off with that. So that has been released as the first thing. The rest of the schedule is expected to be released on Wednesday, July 16th. So around a week and a half after it was originally released last year. So a little bit of a different as far as the release of the schedule. So I thought this whole time that the Panthers were going to be playing an opponent in the playoffs that they have been very familiar with over the last few years, because you want to make that opening night game exciting with the fact that they're raising a banner, the crowd is pumped, and you have an opponent that's very familiar. So it creates more of that energy in the building. But the NHL did announce that the Florida Panthers will be playing the Chicago Blackhawks on Tuesday, October 7th at 5 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. The second game of the triple header is the Pittsburgh Penguins versus the New York Rangers, and then out west, it's going to be the Colorado Avalanche against the LA Kings. All three games will be viewed on ESPN. So this is the thing about how television really rules a lot of things, and they make a lot of the decisions. Sometimes it's not up to the NHL, but it's just what is going to be driving ratings and viewership. And once again, that is the NHL's agenda and what they're trying to do here, trying to get the Chicago Blackhawks on as part of opening night. Because if you remember 2 years ago, they started as far as the opening night, and they were the main window, which was the 8 p.m. window of Penguins Blackhawks when Connor Bedard was first drafted, and then him facing against his idol in Sidney Crosby. They even had Connor Bedard last year when the triple header started, and it was in Seattle. It was a 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific puck drop over there in Seattle. And then for the third straight season, they're having Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks as part of the opening night festivities, this time against the Stanley Cup champions. And if I'm being real with everyone, I'm not a fan of this at all. I can't stand the fact that it's not an opponent that the Panthers have faced in the last few years in the playoffs. The Panthers and the Chicago Blackhawks played in the Panthers' very first game of their existence back in 1993 in the old Chicago Stadium. Yeah, these two teams have been in a division in 2021, the Central Division, when it was the COVID bubble. Yeah, these two teams are connected based on the general managers that have built these two teams in the last 20 years. Dale Talon building the Chicago Blackhawks before they won 3 in 6 years, and then even parts of this Florida Panthers team. And also, they hired the same coach in Joel Quenneville, the the Blackhawks, right before they won in 2010, and even before the he Quenneville ultimately resigned in 2021 for the Panthers. Yeah, there's a lot of connections, but based on a Stanley Cup championship and coming off of that and wanting to create the hype around a second straight championship, this one is this one I'm not a fan of for the Panthers, for the NHL, and also the fact that it's a 5 p.m. start time for the season ticket holder who might be working on this day. Yeah, do you have plenty of time to request off to possibly get the day off, use your PTO, or possibly get off of work early in order to make the game? Yeah, but when you are the Stanley Cup champions, they should be the one catered to, not them being the one catering to the rest of the national TV audience for hockey fans who will be turning on their TV right at 5 p.m. to start watching the triple header of hockey. But still, this is the Stanley Cup champions we're talking about. This is and for the Blackhawks, even over these last 3 years, when they have been on the national stage for games, especially the ones that are like real spotlight games where they're the lone team playing in the national spot. They have multiple times have I watched games and I've seen them just not even be competitive, especially in the Winter Classic last year. They tried forcing them into the Winter Classic because they have what's called a generational talent in Connor Bedard, and the NHL truly believes that, and they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down to get his name out there and the high profile that he is. And the thing is, the team that he's on hasn't done him any favors. Their biggest signing in free agency this year is Dominic Toninato, former Florida Panther, by the way. That's their big free agent signing after going for a good amount of it last year, and then uh, their veterans that they signed, they've ended up flopping. It's been a disaster of trying to build around him. And now Kyle Davidson, the GM, is going to the approach of the youngsters trying to take over and trying to take this team to the next level. And the fact is that there's still the tear down is the easy part, but the build back up is even harder. Why are you putting this team that's not ready against this a two-time defending Stanley Cup champion? I personally don't understand the reasoning behind, other than it's an original six team and they want to get the bigger fan bases in front of the TV in order to hype up the matchup. But for me, it that this is such a downer as far as a matchup that I'm personally looking forward to, because although the Panthers did destroy the Boston Bruins, and a lot of Panther fans were grateful to see that it's a familiar opponent and the fact that you beat them down again, it just doesn't feel the same when it's not a team that has battled against. And yeah, does it create hopefully for a win that the Panthers are expected to get on the first night of the season? Sure. But at the same time, we're out here thinking about celebrating a Stanley Cup championship. And I guess maybe that leaves the game less of a storyline. I guess that would be the good, maybe that's the good part about this. Maybe I'll talk myself into it. The fact that it would mean that the game is less of the actual storyline of opening night, and it's more of just focusing on the fact that they've done it again. Maybe I'll come around, but I want an exciting game as far as the matchup to talk about. As far as what kind of bad blood are we gonna get? Because we saw Trent Frederick go and AJ Greer go after it last year on opening night. I want to see something along the same lines this year, but the Panthers and the Blackhawks don't have the history when it comes to a playoff matchup, which is why I'm very disappointed in the NHL choosing this route as the opening night opponent for the Florida Panthers come October 7th, which we're still just under 90 days away from opening night. So we still have a long way to go, but at least we know when and the time of the Panthers facing the Blackhawks on opening night. So can't dwell on it forever. We got to move on. We got to give our 2 cents of it and then just move on from it. But in segment number 2, we are going to discuss the Stanley Cup getting the names engraved in the cup and also talk about AJ Greer's day with the cup as he brought it to his hometown in Quebec. We'll discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And you realize that your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the candidates faster. I've been in that spot where I needed to hire someone like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs came in handy. They make your job post seen by the right candidate right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a 75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Segment number 2 here on this Monday, July 14th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And I want to say congratulations to NHL alum Joe Pavelski on winning the American Century Championship, a golf tournament that has a whole bunch of celebrities, former athletes playing in the tournament, and the winner is a former NHLer in Joe Pavelski. So walked it off with an eagle at the very end. Matthew Tkachuk also attended this one as well, has taken pictures for multiple days at the tournament, even got a tea time with Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. So there's another thing regarding that. So Matthew Tkachuk looks to be in great spirits as he is continuing to have fun as he is once again a Stanley Cup champion. So the names on the cup are officially done for the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, and the tour of days with the cup have already begun. As we said, we're mostly going to touch some of the new guys and their days with the cup, based on the fact is we don't know what changes the guys winning the cup again will do this year, so we will play those by ear. If it's the same thing that they do, we'll talk about it less and less. But some things I notice for the names on the cup this time around is that some of the names that didn't get a chance to be on the cup last year, even though they were part of the organization, they got their names on the cup this year. Although Jonah Gadjevich and Josh Mahura last year didn't meet the games qualified, played last year. They got their names on the cup last year. So great that Jonah Gadjevich played an important part of these playoffs, has also gotten his name on the cup again this year. So, but this time in a playing role. But no Paul Fenton and no Rick Dudley on the cup. So some of the trainers were not on the cup last year. They got their names on the cup this year. Also, something noteworthy is no Doug Sifu. So if you remember, Doug Sifu got suspended indefinitely from the NHL for going at it with a Leafs fan online and saying very inappropriate things that we're not allowed to say on this show. So that has led to his suspension, and also it's resulted in him not getting his name on the cup. It's an indefinite suspension, So we don't know if that has been, in fact, lifted for Doug Sifu. So as far as AJ Greer and his day with the cup, he took it to the Clemente House in Maison Oxygène de Quebec. It's a house dedicated to families with disabilities. And also, what AJ Greer decided to do during these 3 days back in his home province in Quebec is he decided to run a 3-day hockey clinic for youth players at the price of $25. So he's giving discounts and giving back to his community as far as teaching kids how to play the sport. And also, the camp in itself sold out in 15 minutes. So, great story by AJ Greer. I mean, we remember when we first heard the news about AJ Greer signing with the Florida Panthers. This was another one of those players who had not gotten a lot of playing time in other places prior to Florida, and then gets a role here, and then plays a big part in winning the Stanley Cup. He was seen as the Ryan Lomberg replacement. There was also those old pictures of him meeting Roberto Luongo as someone who is from the same province as Bobby Lou. All old pictures of them, and also being a little bit of an inspiration. So the fact that he signed a 2-year deal, he gets to talk to him on the daily if he wants to, and now that he's bringing back the Stanley Cup to his home province and getting a chance to give back and teach some of the kids, and also helping people who uh, are dealing with things that are out of their control. Once again, a great gesture by AJ Greer in his day with the Stanley Cup over in Quebec. So glad that also the fact that the with the fourth line changing the momentum in the playoffs, and the fact that it was just basically the turning point for the Cats there in once game 3 happened in Toronto. The fact against Toronto, excuse me. The fact is that these three in Nosek, Gadjevich, and Greer are going to have once again a full season together, and they get to be reunited. Because I'm sure it was hard going to the negotiating table saying Gadjevich and Greer are here for another season. Uh, we got to try to find a way to just get Tomasz Nosek back into the mix, because it does feel possible based on uh, even if they do have a little bit of cap space still remaining, the Panthers still found a way. And credit to Bill Zito and company for still trying to get those guys together on under the cap, which is a lot easier said than done. Which I don't envy that position that Bill Zito has in order to just try to find the guys to get it all together there. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss how the new rules for the CBA as far as putting together a cap compliant roster in the postseason, how the Panthers still could have done it, even though they bought with a lot of their LTIR money. We'll discuss all that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. And I've been using FanDuel for some of my favorite matchups, like the home run derby tonight. Get on the app and keep it fresh with new daily promotions. It's the best way to bet. It's easy to use, easy payouts, and makes even regular season games more like must-watch event. New to FanDuel, new customers can get bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Segment number 3 here on this Monday, July 14th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Monday. So, lot for the Panthers as far as the work they had to get done in order to put the best roster they could have together in order to try to repeat as Stanley Cup champions, and even harder work to keep it together, as everybody will want their due as far as money, as far as getting rewarded, as far as feeling respected, which is the great thing about the fact is that they did bring the band back together. Is if you felt disrespected and you wanted personal glory so much as far as pay, that option could have been out there. So once again, the volumes that it speaks to, the fact that these guys are willing to sacrifice personal gain is in order to win the Stanley Cup, even though winning the Stanley Cup in itself is somewhat of personal gain, but you're sharing it with uh, teammates that you consider family. So a little bit of personal in order to get this, hopefully get the feeling again with guys who mean so much to you and that you are willing to go to battle again. But as far as for the Panthers and them trying to put a roster together with the new rules of a roster needing to be cap compliant as far as the 20 players put together. That started a big conversation for the Panthers based what on how their roster could have looked like or did eventually look like for these playoffs and what it could look like in the future. Well, with the new rules in the CBA needing a cap compliant 20 guys together, that for the Panthers makes you wonder what it could be. So, Puckpedia decided to put together uh, what the numbers would look like for and they did it just for the Stanley Cup finalists in the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers. So, the Edmonton Oilers' cap hit total for the players that they have on their roster goes up to 80 million, which the cap last year was at 88 million. So for the Panthers and what they put together for game 6 of the Stanley Cup final, and they decided to include buyouts, overages, and buried cap hits here. So that total would come down to 93 million 38,000. That's what the cap hit would be for the Florida Panthers. So a lot of fan bases would look at that and say, "Oh, of course the Panthers were able to create this super team. They used LTIR and they were able to get themselves over the cap. But they still could have found a way to still put this team together and still find themselves in a way that's still cap compliant." By the way, the new rules based on the CBA does not does not discuss about buyouts and overages for your playoff roster, your game day roster, excuse me. And again, because it's 20 players that you have to be under the cap for the playoffs, that still creates somewhat of a loophole. Not entirely. So, with the Panthers and the numbers that they have on their roster, which their overall cap would be 93 million. Just remember that some of the trades that they made in this past trade deadline, it were seen as bonuses for what they were putting all together. For example, Vitek Vanacek coming to the Florida Panthers on an expiring deal at 3.4 million, that came at the expense of a guy in Patrick Giles whose ceiling is a fourth line center. That's what his ceiling is. So if they didn't have that situation if they had the situation where they had to be under the cap, with what they put as their game day roster, you're not trading for a goalie to at 3.4 million in Vitek Vanacek. You're trading for a $1 million goaltender there. So subtract 2.4 million already from the Panthers cap here. So that brings them to just under 89 million. The fact that they gave a conditional second for Brad Marchand, and here's another thing about the new CBA as far as broker teams. it's not automatic that you could just trade to a broker team and then they hold on to a certain percentage of a cap hit and then they could be traded to another team. There has to be some time spent on that broker team before they get traded again. So that won't come into effect next season, but it's going to come to effect the season after. But in this season that the Panthers traded for Brad Marchand, if they needed to get under the 88 million cap number for the NHL, instead of trading for half of Brad Marchand's cap hit, which was just over 6.1, you would trade for a quarter of it. And then there would be that broker team. And that would bring Marchand's cap hit to bring to the Florida Panthers at 1.5. So the Panthers would still find a way to get under the salary cap ceiling in the case of this exercise of getting it under the cap. And again, people want to discuss and want to move the goalpost for how the Panthers would be able to fit everyone under if these rules were to apply today. But Bill Zito and the wizardry, the mastery that he does when it comes to the salary cap, he's found a way to work under the rules given to him, which there was no rules in needing to be cap compliant in the playoffs. So he was able to trade for some insurance on his roster in the likes of Vitek Vanacek and even not pay as much for Brad Marchand. You pay a little bit more for Brad Marchand in order to keep that number down, or maybe you even pay a little bit more for Seth Jones, which again, now after the Panthers got the Stanley Cup and they have a top four defenseman under the roster for multiple years. Honestly, it even feels like Spencer Knight, along with a first round pick, trade for Seth Jones was a little bit of an underpay. Call me crazy, but now looking at that and seeing uh, how solidified the roster is for multiple years, and the fact that there is that level of security, that's a little bit of it does look like an underpay, especially because the fact that Sergei Bobrovsky is going to be, you feel so good whenever he does come out night in and night out that he is that is one thing that you don't have to worry about whatever is between the pipes. Yeah, there's that question about Sergei's future after this year on whether he's going to resign, but the fact is that it hasn't been a shocker that it just hasn't come out of the blue. Maybe it does happen this season, but the fact is that you trade one area of strength that you had on your team, and you trade that to build an area of need on your team. That's another thing about how the Panthers and their ability to fit it under the roster and under the cap is still quite hella impressive once again of how Bill Zito is able to pull this off. And that is one of those heroes for the Panthers and Seth Jones, who the Panthers don't win the Stanley Cup without him, for the role that he's played, stepping up in a top pair when needed, being a presence on the second pair, going on those top power play times, top PK times. He really truly does it all. And paying 7 million for it, and you're gonna be paying second pair money for the next 4 or 5 years having him on the roster. It's once again great management of the cap, which the Panthers would be in this situation if they decide to do a few things more in order to get cap compliant under this under what the future rules would be if you were to apply it in 2024-25. So if anyone has something to say about if the Panthers would have been able to fit it in this year, show them this episode, show them this exercise, and also you could even pull out a calculator yourself, pull up Puckpedia, and show what it would look like for the Panthers to put together a roster that is legal enough to play a playoff game. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Next time we talk to you, whether it'll be maybe it'll be Tuesday, whether it'll be Wednesday, we're going down on our episodes recorded. We are going to possibly preview what the rest of the schedule will look like and what we would like to see the rest of the way for the Panthers in their mission to defend once again their Stanley Cup championship and more. So make sure to come back and subscribe then, and we'll discuss everything as far as what the release will end up being. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.